Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. And welcome back to Achampnator Reads. Today we continue The Last Elf. And we're going back in with chapter 14 of part 2. Chapter 14. Roby sat down on a tree trunk. She looked at the clear sky, then at the trees at the bottom of the valley. The leaves were starting to turn yellow. In the meadow, the last flowers of early autumn shined in the light of the rising sun. They were the little yellow flowers that Roby's mother had called the king's buttons. And those blue flowers that look like bells, and the ones that are a kind of little ball, and if you blow on them, all the bits fly away and the flower disappears. Autumn was coming. That meant winter would not be far behind. First autumn, then winter. That was the rule. Autumn. Few chestnuts, hardly any maize porridge, few apples, cold feet, and a snotty nose. Winter. No chestnuts, hardly any maize porridge, no apples, frozen feet, nose so snotty that the snout runs down to where you breathe and turns into coughs. You could warm yourself up with firewood, not in the sense that you could burn it. No, that was forbidden, but in the sense that you cut it with an axe. After one trunk, another trunk, and then another trunk, and in the end, your back and arms achy, and you had blisters on your hands. But for a while, at least, you weren't dying of cold. Then the cold came back, and you were left with the blisters on your hands. If you survived, spring came, and then you had to go around the farms, feeding the animals, repairing the fences, and taking the cows to graze. And that was a good thing, because sometimes you could pinch an egg or a bit of milk. But you had to be clever. The farms were all in the country of Delagar, and a theft from the county of Delagar. Even just an egg meant 20 blows with a cudgel. They couldn't count, but 20 meant a blow of the cudgel for each of the child's fingers and toes. Kala was missing a finger because she had aimed badly when chopping wood off with the axe. When they beat her, they added an extra blow. In the summer you had to compete with lice and mosquitoes for your blood. But there was so much food to steal that everyone managed to polish something off without being caught. Even the dopiest ones, the ones who had just arrived, the ones who still cried. Roby was clever. She had never been caught. Not last year, at least. 2 years before, when she had just arrived at the orphanage, she had been caught 3 times. But she had been little at the time. Dopey, like all little children, and she had always had her father and mother in her head. To be a good thief, you have to concentrate. When you have your father and your mother in the house that was your home in your head, concentration isn't enough. Even when you try to keep your father and mother out of your head, you just had to think of your little green and pink wooden boat or your rag doll for tears to come to your eyes. Now it was fine. Now she concentrated. No one caught her anymore. All of a sudden, the memory of her mother's apples filled with her so quickly that she could almost smell them. Her mother cut the apples into slices and left them to dry in the woodshed. She pretended to be angry when Robbie stole some of them, and then she chased her all around the woodshed. And when she caught her, she covered her with kisses, and they both laughed like mad. She ate the dry apples with warm milk by the fire in the hearth, while she shelled her doll in her arms, and outside the snow fell in thick layers, and the world turned white like the wings of the wild geese, when the sun passes through them. Then in the evening her father came with something really good to eat. Her father was a hunter as well as a farmer, a shepherd, an apple planter, a pig breeder, cowhand, carpenter, roofer, shed builder, and fisherman. And he always brought good things home for dinner. In winter it was trout, because they were easy to catch. You made a hole in the ice that covered the river, and you waited for a while. The memory of trout roasted with rosemary also filled her head and her stomach with a spasm. Robbie dismissed the memory. If she were caught now, there would be no kisses. She dismissed her tears. Tears are for children. She wasn't a child anymore. The sun appeared and lit her up. The air grew warmer. At the bottom of the clearing there were two big walnut trees. Walnuts are wonderful at the start of autumn, when they are on the trees, because they are fresh. You take off the bitter skin with your nails, and under it is the nut. But the walnut trees could be seen from the windows of the little wood and stone house that towered over the crude building of the orphanage. Too risky. Beyond the walnut trees there were brambles, which were nothing like walnuts, but were something nonetheless. But the blackberries were within the view of the archers, who stood guard in the sentry boxes. True enough, at that time of day, the guards were probably still asleep, but it wasn't worth the risk to steal the watery things that didn't fill your stomach even long enough for the scratches from the bramble bushes to stop hurting. Robbie closed her eyes, and behind her eyelids a dream was born, the one she always dreamed every time she was able to sit in peace with her eyes closed. She dreamed of a dragon with a prince riding on its back, a prince with hair so fair it looked like silver. It was a huge dragon with two enormous green wings that filled the sky. The prince wore a white jacket that flew across the sky. The prince was smiling. The dragon was flying toward her. They were coming to get her, to take her away from here, forever. It was a dream that had formed all by itself. At first it had been indistinct, something pale on something green. With each passing day, the dream became more clear. It was as though the prince and the dragon were flying through fog and getting closer to her every day. Robbie dismissed the dream. It was stupid. Dragons didn't exist anymore. They had been cruel and wicked animals, and they had all been wiped out centuries ago. And kind princes must be extinct as well. Or perhaps they had gone to other countries because all memory of them was lost. Robbie opened her eyes. A flock of partridges rose up in front of her in the golden light of early autumn. There was a flutter of wings, which, for a moment, filled the sky with dark turquoise. The flock had emerged from the withorn bushes in the lower part of the clearing, the side that was invisible both from the orphanage and from the sentry boxes. Her father had been a hunter. If he were still alive, he would have taken out his bow, and she and her mother would have eaten roast partridge with rosemary. Her father's name had been Monsieur. He'd had black hair, like hers, and had been big and tall, like an oak. His mother would have plucked the partridge and used the feathers to sew them one by one to her jacket, to make it both splendid and as warm as toast. Her mother's name had been Saria. Robbie tried to pull the filthy cape of coarse, greyish hemp cloth over her ankles to warm them up a little, but it was too short. Her mother had had dark blonde hair, and made the best apple fritters in the whole valley. Robbie got to her feet. She didn't have her father's bow and arrows, but still their Turkish partridges meant food. They laid eggs in early autumn, when they were nice and fat. After spending the summer gobbling butterflies, worms, and beetles. You can even eat butterflies, beetles, and worms, but only when there's nothing better. While eggs are one of the best things that exist in the world. When you have an egg in your stomach, it's not just hunger that fades away for a while, but cold and fear too. Robbie glanced around nervously. She had woken up first. Everyone else was still asleep. She heard the restless slumber of the other children in the dormitory. There were groans and coughs as usual, and from the little house she heard the regular snores of the two guardians. Slump and Flash, husband and wife, affectionately known as the hyenas, who slept in a real house with a real fire. Before her, the valley opened up beneath the sun, and the mountains looked blue in the distance. The first snow gleamed on their peaks. The soldiers' sentry boxes were far away, and the lower part of the clearing was out of their sight. The soldiers, according to the orphans, just in case the soldiers, according to the hyenas, were there to protect the children of the house of orphans, just in case some evildoer came to do who knows what, perhaps to steal their lies, the only things that were in any abundance. In reality, without the soldiers in the sentry boxes, not one of the children, not even the smallest and stupidest, would have stayed in the horrible hovel, along with the two hyenas and their cudgel, vying with worms for maize porridge, working until they couldn't stand, until they were soundly thrashed, until they died of cold or were eaten alive by mosquitoes, depending on the season. Robbie didn't move until she was sure that everyone was asleep and no one was watching her. Even if you found it in a partridge's nest on the moor, in a walnut tree that didn't belong to anyone, or among the thorns of a blackberry bush, all food had to be handed over. If you ate it yourself, it was seen as theft. Theft and selfishness. Selfishness was a serious crime. The parents of Lomier, who was Robin's best friend, had been selfish. 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 As Flash spat out every time he said it. Selfish meant that they had tried to pay less tax than they were supposed to, with the laughable excuse that otherwise the children would die of hunger, and the ridiculous pretext that the beans and grain they had pulled from their land by their own back-breaking work, by the sweat of their own brows, belonged to them and not to the county of Delagar, where her own parents were concerned. Robbie preferred not to think about her own parents. She dismissed the thought. Not this morning. not after discovering where the partridges had their nests. She crept over, slowly, not going in a straight line, so that if someone spotted her, she could give the impression that she was taking a perfectly innocent stroll. She wasn't sure that it would be believable that a little girl half dead with hunger would set off for a stroll on the moor at dawn, but Slump and Flash were not the brightest creatures in the world, and she could always say she had been woken by a bad dream and wanted to forget it. Bad dreams came frequently. The grass grew taller. Robbie went down on all fours to disappear into it. She crept as far as the bushes. The nest was at the height of her nose. She almost bumped into it. Inside were 2 eggs. 2 moments without hunger. They were small eggs, their shells speckled with a delicate brown color that turned to gold at its palest points. Robbie took one egg between her hands and felt its warm smoothness against her skin. She closed her eyes for a moment. When her mother had pressed her close, she had told her that when we're happy, the people who have loved us and who no longer exist come back from the realm of the dead to be near us. Now, perhaps her father and mother were with her. Robbie opened her eyes again. She took another look at her incomparable treasure of 2 partridge eggs, and then set about devouring them. The egg she had in her hand she ate immediately. She made a little hole in it by striking it against a branch and sucked it with fierce joy. First the white part and then the best part, the yolk, which she zipped up slowly, drop by drop, with the pleasure bordering up in the joy of life itself. The problem was the other one. Her first idea was to eat it immediately. What you have in your stomach, you can't lose, and no one can steal it from you. But 2 eggs is such a lot. Sometimes your stomach, when it is very used to being half empty, can't hold things. It begins to hurt and you throw up. And also, however much you put in it, half a day later your belly is gripped with hunger again. It's better to eat a small amount at a time. Robbie wrapped the second egg in a big clump of earth, wrapped that in turn in a handful of grass, and hid it not in the back pocket under her cape, which was used for tools, but in the other one, the hidden one, under the filthy grayish jute jacket she had made, using big thorns as needles and a piece of string stolen from the big bags, where they kept the maize porridge, a kind of vault where things could be hidden. A day without hunger, Robbie breathed in the morning air. It was going to be a good day. Okay, everyone, this was chapter 14. Next time we continue with chapter 15. But for now I say, have a good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, wherever you are.